So welcome everyone to Disciplinary Data Ascendant, Challenges and Solutions for Professionals Buying, Storing, and Accessing Unique Data. My name is Dan Hickey. I'm from NYU, and I'm joined by colleagues Cynthia Cronin-Carden from Penn and Jeremy Groen from Data Axle. Cynthia and I are business librarians with responsibilities for collection development. And Jeremy and Data Axle are at the forefront of selling commercial data to academic libraries. Cynthia and I zeroed in on this topic based on recent discussions around collection development. And the need for this discussion was really hammered home lately when we both purchased the same unwieldy data set. Cynthia will talk about that in a little more depth. And recently, there's also been a lot of chatter on this topic on listservs as well. So really relevant to what we're doing today. In terms of the realities that we're dealing with, the need for data is skyrocketing in academia because researchers want that unique data to publish on. And business librarians in particular are seeing a huge interest in commercial data because our faculty are more closely aligned with private industry. Commercial data's sources pose a particularly unique challenge because our organizations have varying levels of ability to buy, store, and provision access to that data. So today we're going to do some case studies from Penn and NYU. We're going to talk about a pilot survey that Cynthia and I proctored among business librarians. And then we're going to talk about the vendor perspective as well. So Cynthia is going to start us off with a discussion of the history to set the stage, and then also delve into examples from Penn.
Hi, I am Cynthia Cronin-Carden. I am the Resource Development and Reference Librarian for Lippincott Library, which is the business library of the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm just going to give some historical context and let you know where we're at Penn. So this is a very simplistic history, but obviously first there was print. And I remember back in the day of getting random samples and using calculators or adding machines or a simple pencil to do all of your calculations. Then most schools, I guess by the late 70s maybe, had computer labs, and you would have to go in and create this mass of punch cards to put into the machine. And usually what happened is one of the cards would be wrong, and your whole process would be ruined and you'd have to start again. It was really unwieldy. But then Lotus 1-2-3 came along, Excel, and things became much easier. The technology advanced, we got fancier computer programs, and we started having a plethora of subscription databases that had user-friendly interfaces, stuff we're all familiar with now, like Data Axle. Words was developed and provided a standard interface. So within Words, you can search a number of databases at one time. And so that exploded things even more. Then people got into data mining and text mining. More sophisticated computer languages were developed, and we're sort of come up to where we are now. Change is a constant, and now everyone wants big data. A sample set is no longer enough, and users are moving away from formatted databases. They want the raw data that they can manipulate themselves. And vendors are beginning to see advantages of providing raw data sets They don't have to organize them, clean them, provide the interface to use them. So now what? A data future raises a lot of questions. How does this affect collection development? How do we store this stuff? How do we make it discoverable and accessible? How do we maintain it? Who owns it? And what are the costs beyond the price of the data itself, the staff, the equipment, the time? So at Penn, several years ago, our Constellation of Repositories committee was developed to explore all of this. It has representatives from data services, from IT, from data librarians, which, yes, we now have. And what it doesn't have are bibliographers or catalogers, or anyone from our licensing department, at least not at this time. Penn Libraries right now has about 115 data sets. And they come in all different formats: CSV, Excel, zip, TIFF, SPSS, text, Word docs, you name it. And as a result, we have a myriad of storage solutions as well. There's open access, easy proxy storage, Alma storage, Metrodoc storage, Dataverse, which we have, but we haven't really put anything in it yet. Hard drives, CDs, again, the list is endless. Future storage solutions could include Amazon, Redivus, Geo Blacklight, or virtual servers. But we have no cost estimates, no standards, no plans, and no workflows. At the same time, this summer, the bibliographers were tasked with rewriting our collection development policies to include the acquisition of data sets as a specific category of materials or resources. The Lippincott experience began with digitizing historical corporate annual reports going back to the 1800s. It was very small scale, and it was stored on a library server. It's now in our Easy Proxy server. It was very labor intensive. But in 2004, we began purchasing data sets, including the corporate affiliations, flat files, cryptocurrency database from Keiko, and blue chip financials, among others. But we needed a storage plan to get approval from the library's collection development committee. Penn has 14 libraries, so they have the final oversight on what we get approved and what we purchase. We were lucky, Lippincott was lucky, because of the Wharton Research and Analytics Department came to our rescue. They were already storing data sets for Wharton faculty, and they knew how to clean and store data sets and what they need to do to maintain them. These are made available via box. And Lippincott, we have our own data wrangler librarian, Kevin, who acts as the liaison to researchers. But again, this is mediated. Researchers cannot just go to the catalog, click on the link, and download the data directly. So our biggest challenge came this year when we were asked to purchase the Mergent International Company Directory, which is a huge data set. Do you want to advance? Thank you. It's 4.17 terabytes. It's 4 files, which are zip files contained within zip files. It's too big. It's too big for Merchant's own Data Explorer tool. It's too big for SharePoint. It's too big for anything, really. And so for now, Wharton Research and Analytics is storing this for us in the Wharton Dropbox, but that is limited to Wharton users only and is not a satisfactory solution. This is costly, it's inaccessible, there are ownership issues, and this is where we are now. I'll let you know what happens when we figure it all out. And on to Dan to talk about our survey and the NYU experience.
Thanks, Cynthia. So our survey was a very small pilot study done of business librarians with purchasing ability. And we had kind of 2 key findings, which are that despite most respondents having access to data peers at their libraries, they were still struggling with these workflows. And the other finding was that many corporate vendors are not prepared to accommodate the relatively inflexible needs of academic buyers. So here you can see one of our questions, which is, how frequently do you receive requests for purchasing data? And you can see that a great deal, a moderate amount, and occasionally are very over-indexed, and rarely is only at 6.3%. And another question we asked was, how difficult is it at your college or university to store and provision access to the purchased data files? So 5 was very easy on the far right-hand side, and on the left was very hard. Now, keep in mind that we asked a lot of elite schools this question, and people who are already doing this work. So if we were to expand this, we may see a different distribution in terms of very hard and very easy. And then this, I thought, was one of our most interesting findings. When you can't purchase data for your patrons, which of the reasons are at issue? Licensing terms, it was number 1, tied with data products are too expensive, which reflects the reality of, I think, where we are. And shortly after that was no budget for data or no ability to purchase the data as a format. And then trailing behind these 2 were the inability to ingest or store the data and the inability to provision access to the data. So you can see that these things kind of stack. Interestingly, we had one person who wrote in other, and that was ADA compliance, which is something that I haven't thought about, but is very interesting and an ongoing challenge for higher ed, especially in terms of our legal obligations. And then finally, I just wanted to end with this slide, which is, what level of priority do you place on building these data collections? So we can see that a lot of people are saying in the high, very high range, and no one is saying very low. So this is all work that people really want to do or feel that they must do. Now I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about a technical case study at NYU. This is kind of talking about what our storage and access solutions look like in the past and then looking towards the future. So we've got multiple different waves. I should say wave 0 was having no infrastructure, and it was a painful time. Our first wave was an institutional repository. It's DSpace. A lot of you probably know and recognize DSpace. And at NYU, we branded it as the FDA, which is a little confusing for end users. Our second wave is a homegrown product called Research Workspace. It was library developed, it's mountable, and it was formerly running on a third-party storage solution in the cloud called NetApp, but now it's running on an Isilon cluster. The benefits of this is that it's both mediated and immediately accessible to the end user. I'll go into these a little bit more in a minute. And then we can talk about Invenio at the end. So this is DSpace. I dearly love DSpace, but the pros and cons are very palpable. The pros, the librarian can control almost all aspects of the ingest workflow, and they can also control who has access to it. You can limit access to an individual, the university, or you can open it to all. The cons are that DSpace really wasn't designed for data, let alone big data. There are file size limits, and with that comes questions about stability. Oh, sorry. And there are also data integrity questions. So for example, we had a historical business file that became corrupt, and we needed to use checksums to actually confirm that that file was corrupt. And then I'm not sure if Jeremy will talk about this, but at NYU, we had a pretty substantial data loss. And so we needed to ask Jeremy to re-provision those files for us. Our FDA, our institutional repository, was backed up on tape. And so we would have had to go back to the tape to actually get those files, which would have been extremely laborious, as you can imagine. This is our present moment. These are our private data collections. The screenshot is slightly old though. This is in the NetApp app, although you can't really tell. And so here you can see a couple of our different data sets on the left-hand side. Realty Track. I'll talk about the challenges of these data right now. So Realty Track, you can look up your own mortgage in there. So it's very sensitive data. That's why these are all in our private collections. L2 political voter data, which includes sensitive data, and reference USA data, also a data axle product. In this case, we were just provisioning access to it via this interface. Some other data we have that is a little problematic. Well, I shouldn't say problematic, but the consumer historical data that's available from Data Axle that has information about people and their race that is sensitive and requires mediation. And then the DMB, the Dun & Bradstreet data that Cynthia was talking about, that it's not necessarily sensitive data, but it's so expensive that to protect it, we really need to mediate access. So Research Workspace is cool because you can enter via a simple URL. Users can interact with the uncompressed data in a Drive environment, although you must unzip it. So for example, the Dun & Bradstreet data is really too large to unzip. It's built for large data. And we can also implement Globus endpoints for speed. Some of you may recognize Globus from the Nielsen-Kilt data, for those of you who are business librarians. The cons is that all of these workflows are technical and they're really out of liaison librarians' hands. They're really in our data specialists' hands. And then finally, we're looking towards the future as well. So Invenio RDM is a kind of like a discovery layer that might be most similar for people to Dataverse. In the lower left-hand corner, you can see an inset of kind of like a Google search box. We're branding this as ultraviolet. The NYU, our university color is violet, so everyone really loved that. And you can see some export options like JSON that are relevant to data as a format. So Invenio is overlaying our storage options. It has data-centric features like viewing a preview of the data itself, including headings, and it's built with current and future data needs in mind. At NYU, we're at 0.1.0 in terms of our build, so very, very much alpha. Yeah. Before I move on to Jeremy, I just wanted to mention that we, similar to Cynthia, we just debuted a new collection development manual. And in that manual, the data section in terms of our workflows is almost completely blank. So while we have all of these technical abilities to connect users with the end data, and we're developing that, we do not have established buying, licensing, and ingest workflows. We're kind of building building the train tracks as the train is moving. And really the urgency of our end users is what's lighting a fire under us. So now we're going to move on to Jeremy, who's going to discuss how Data Axle has been working with librarians to get data into researchers' hands.
Yes, thank you, Dan. So Jeremy Groen, I'm with Data Axle. I manage our academic vertical. I have been with the company for about 12 years, and the vast majority of that has been in academia, so about 10 years or so. So that kind of leads into the journey that we've been dealing with or working with as we've promoted our historical data and big data in general. So it started out back in 2012, as simple as it sounds, mailing hard drives to customers. So loading the data, boxing it up, and sending it out UPS to customers. So we've advanced technically since then. So now we're loading it up into an FTP site. So real simple on our side. So Dan's example of, data issues happen. It's the reality of things. Somebody leaves, a password goes with them, data disappears. So we try and be a good partner in that sense of course, we're happy to reload this data for you and accommodate for when these situations arise. As I mentioned, it has become a little bit easier of a process on our side where these files are all pre-cut. So it's essentially a drag and drop on our side. And then we have secure username password for anyone to go and grab that purchase data, whether it's the first time or reloading or whatever it may be. But the data itself is large in nature. We're not in the terabyte range just yet. But when we're looking at the consumer data spanning back to 2006 annually, 3 billion records is a lot of data to navigate through. So it poses challenges on our side of, who is able to work with this data. Not every university is equipped to manage 140 gigs, let alone 4 terabytes of data. So the demand for the data is certainly there, whether it's funneling through the business library. Data Axle's data is multidisciplinary. So we get requests from schools of public health, the business school, GIS, schools of public policy, real estate. It's multidisciplinary. So it's trying to corral everyone into one space of, okay, the demands here, can the library host this for the school's authorized users, and do they have the resources for it? And the majority of the time the answer is no. We would love to, but we just aren't equipped to host this data. So that's kind of led us to evolve on our side of, the more access points, the better. Is it easy for us to, provide all the raw data and then just step away and say, hey, good luck. If you have any questions, circle back, sure. But it isn't always the best solution for the situation of the university. So more access points. So having it available in words, which is a great resource, availability in Data Planet as well. And then we have the ability to host the data for the school itself. So it's all a little bit time sensitive, especially when it comes to funding these purchases. So if there's funding allocated for it, but they aren't able to host the data, but there's demand for the data, we're happy to host it until they kind of sort that all out on their side. So again, the more flexibility, the better. We're trying to be accommodating, being a great partner in making the data functional and usable. However the scenario fits. So once they start digging into that data, there's always going to be questions, and those questions, they filter through Cynthia and they filter through Dan, and then they come back to me, and then usually I have to filter them through somebody else because I have some answers, but I don't have all answers, especially when we're looking back 25 years about how a snapshot of our business database appeared in time. So there's moves, there's comings and goings within our business and consumer databases daily, monthly, yearly. So we try and be an open book, letting everyone know this is what was happening at this time. And again, being an accommodating partner. So that's certainly a challenge on our side is, once we provide the data and then people start digging into it, there's always going to be questions, but that's part of the challenge. And I think we're certainly at a better point than we were 12 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever it may be. So it's just always an ongoing challenge, especially when it comes to legal and licensing. So when we provide the data, we license it in an ongoing manner. So we're providing perpetual access to it. You own the data, but it comes to the point of who is able to access the data. What's the use case? Dan, if you want to slide ahead just one more, thank you. Every institution has a different definition of authorized user than the next. And as a data company, we provide data to all types of small, medium, large size businesses, academic and government institutions. So when we license the data to a Penn or an NYU, we want to make sure that the data is kind of staying within the realm of an authorized user of NYU or of Penn. So that's kind of a big sticking point, because we don't want a government official or somebody in a government office to come into the library and say, I'm an authorized user because they allow for walk-in access and I'd like to access, 3 billion records of data, actual historical data. So it's a little tricky. It's all kind of case by case. And I think to kind of hammer home the point is we try and be flexible. We try and be accommodating. We look at this on that case by case scenario, and we don't want you as librarians pushing away these types of requests and saying, no, data Axle won't allow for it. They're really restrictive, because it's at the end of the day, if researchers are using our data and finding it valuable and citing it, the more visibility and validation, the better for us, because it's going to generate better demand and more interest in our data. So it's tricky. I'm sure you filter through these requests often. I'm sure you've had to say no plenty of times, but we want you to be able to say yes more often than not. So with that, I guess I will kind of wrap up, send it back to Dan. We can talk about next steps, but happy to be a part of this, and hopefully Data Axle can be a great vendor too, I guess, to everyone going forward.
Thanks, Jeremy. An interesting point relevant to Jeremy is that in terms of the support after the fact, he created an amazing crosswalk to link data for some of our users in the past. So just a quick example of how Jeremy is kind of like doing that next level work. In terms of our next steps, these are kind of what we think are the most important pieces. So the first is the need to extend this collections discussion in our professional organizations. It's really going to be a huge piece of the future of collection development, and liaison librarians in particular should be helping craft kind of these standards in this data future. The next one is collaboration is key, and you can see all of these different parties that we've outlined here. I won't read them all. But only by partnering and learning more about others are we going to be able to meet these data needs of our end users and ultimately assist them in kind of advancing the mission, the research mission of the university. The next one is developing models, standards, and workflows that mainstream the ability to offer commercial data sets as a service. Liaison librarians here, I think, are really ideally situated to drive this process because we're positioned at the center of all stakeholders, And it's an imperative for us to understand the needs of all stakeholders, so we can be kind of the Rosetta Stone that's unlocking this for everyone. And then finally, there is addressing the licensing issues head on and working closely with vendors to understand their constraints and the researcher use cases. Our top two issues that we found in the survey were licensing issues and also price issues. So what is the fair market value for this data? And only working with our vendors will we be able to really resolve that. So thank you everyone for listening to our talk. We're looking forward to your questions during the live Q&A. And please do feel free to reach out to any of us. We're really interested in continuing this discussion. We only have a brief period of time to talk about it today, but talking about any of these platforms or data sets or issues could really take a whole hour on their own. So don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye.